It's strange how a tiny decision, something as simple as forgetting to turn a lock, can detonate a life. That night, I didn't check the door. I didn't think twice. And someone walked in. They didn't just see something they weren't supposed to, they saw everything. The secret. The betrayal. The shame. It wasn't just the bedroom they walked into, it was the truth I'd buried for 2 years. I tore apart a home. I ruined a boy I once promised to protect. I became someone I can barely recognize. But after all this time, I'm ready to tell it. Before I start, I should say this: if you're expecting something polished, neat, or justified, this isn't that. What I'm going to say might make you angry. It might make you judge me. And honestly, that's fair. But I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to tell the truth. My truth. The one I've swallowed and carried and buried for years, pretending it never happened. But it did. My name is Miriam Huffman. I was 35 years old when this started. I was married to Joe Carroll. He was my third husband. And if I'm being honest, I never thought I'd get married again after the second. Joe wasn't like the others. He was older, successful, confident. He had this way of making a room feel small when he stepped into it. You couldn't ignore him, even if you wanted to. He didn't chase me, though. I think that's what made me say yes. He didn't need me. Not in the clingy, desperate way I'd gotten used to. Joe was focused. Sharp. Busy. Always busy. And when I say always, I mean always. He traveled almost non-stop. China, Germany, London, Dubai, his passport lived a more exciting life than I ever did. He'd leave for 2-3 weeks at a time, come back 4-5 days, then disappear again. That was our rhythm. And at first, I didn't mind it. I liked the space. I liked the house, big, quiet, filled with expensive things I never asked for. He made sure I had everything. Except him. The silence crept in slowly. At first, I filled it with wine and old movies. I'd spend hours scrolling through furniture catalogs I never bought from, or painting my nails in different colors just to feel like something was changing. I'd walk through the house with no music on, just listening to the emptiness bounce off the walls. Eventually, I stopped waiting for his calls. Then Anthony moved in. Joe's son. His only child. He was 18. A senior in high school. His mother, Joe's second wife, had gone to take care of her parents, and I guess he didn't want to move across the country with her. Joe asked me if it was all right. I said yes. What else was I going to say? At first, it was fine. We barely spoke. He was quiet, polite. Always had headphones in. He'd come home late, eat leftovers straight from the fridge, then disappear into his room. I didn't pay him much attention. He wasn't a kid, but he wasn't exactly a man yet either. Just somewhere in between. But as weeks went by, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even noticeable at first. It was in the way he asked if I needed help carrying groceries in. The way he actually listened when I talked, like really listened, not with one eye on his phone. It was how he'd laugh at my stupid jokes, the ones Joe barely blinked at. How he'd ask how I was doing, not out of politeness, but because he actually wanted to know. And then there were the little things. The way he looked at me, sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he lingered in the kitchen just a second too long. The way I started looking at myself in the mirror before I walked out to make coffee. I didn't plan anything. I didn't plot or chase or lure. I just noticed him. And he noticed me. And that noticing became something else. The worst part? He wasn't even trying to get my attention. That's what made it worse. I was the one who started to feel something I shouldn't have. And I could have stopped it there. I should have. I could have created distance. I could have told Joe. I could have done a million different things. But I didn't. I let it keep going. I told myself I was lonely. I told myself Joe wouldn't care. I told myself 100 lies and wrapped them around my guilt like blankets. He was just a boy. But he was also someone who made me feel seen. And I hadn't felt that in years. And that's how it started. Not with a kiss. Not with a touch. Just a feeling. Small. Quiet. Dangerous. It was late. Past midnight, I think. I'd been drinking, not enough to lose control, but enough to feel the warmth settle in and loosen my thoughts. It had been another one of those long days where the house felt too big, and my phone hadn't buzzed once except for junk emails. Joe hadn't called in 2 days. Not a single text. I sat in the kitchen with the lights low, sipping wine that had gone a little flat, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional pop of the baseboards. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just there. And then I heard the door open. It startled me. Not in a scared kind of way, but in that sudden, jarring way when you forget someone else even lives in the house. Anthony came stumbling in, keys jingling, shoes scraping across the floor. He was laughing under his breath at something I couldn't hear. His cheeks were flushed, and his eyes were glassy. He looked surprised to see me sitting there. I asked him if he was okay. He nodded. Said he was just out with some friends. Something about someone's birthday and cheap vodka. I smiled. Told him to drink water before bed. Typical small talk, harmless. But then he didn't go upstairs. He just stood there. Then leaned on the counter. I poured him a glass of water, and he sat down across from me. His posture was loose, his voice low, but he wasn't sloppy. He looked tired. But not the kind of tired you sleep off. The kind that lives behind your eyes. We started talking, real talking. He asked me if I liked living here. I said I wasn't sure. He asked if Joe ever stayed home longer than a week. I said not really. He asked if I was happy. I didn't answer that one. We started laughing about something, I don't even remember what. Something stupid. He called one of his teachers a sad robot. I said I knew exactly what that felt like. And in that moment, everything just felt light. Like the air between us wasn't as heavy anymore. And that's when it slipped out. I didn't plan it. I didn't think it through. I just said it. Do you think I'm beautiful? It hung there, in the space between my wine glass and his silence. He didn't laugh. He didn't look away. He just stared at me, then said yeah. Then he said it again, like the first time wasn't enough. Yeah, you are. And I remember the way he looked at me when he said it. Not with confusion. Not with hesitation. With honesty. Like it was obvious to him. I felt something in my stomach twist. I should have walked away. I should have poured the rest of my wine down the sink and gone to bed and locked the door and never spoken about it again. But I didn't. I leaned in. And he didn't pull away. And then I kissed him. It was quick. Soft. Scary. And when I started to pull back, he kissed me again. He didn't leave. I didn't ask him to. He followed me to my room, and I let him. We lay on the bed, fully clothed, just next to each other. His hand brushed against mine. My fingers found his. I remember the way the silence settled over the room. Not awkward. Not peaceful. Just loud in the way silence can be when everything's about to change. We didn't do anything that night. No one crossed that line. Not technically. But I knew. I knew it was already done. I told myself it was loneliness. Just one night. But the truth? I'd already crossed the line. A few days passed. I kept thinking he would bring it up. That he'd ask me what that kiss meant. Or maybe apologize for it. or act weird, or avoid me. But none of that happened. He came downstairs the next morning like nothing had happened. Said good morning. Ate cereal. Left for class. And I was the one sitting there with a heart pounding so loud I thought it would crack the tile under my feet. I told myself it meant nothing to him. That he was young, careless, maybe even embarrassed. And I told myself that was good. I told myself it meant I still had a way out. That this didn't have to become anything. But then Friday came. Joe was already out of town again, Tokyo this time, I think. I don't even remember what the trip was for. It didn't matter anymore. I was already starting to expect him to be gone. I texted Anthony. I didn't even think it through. Just said, movie night? He said yes. I didn't mean for anything to happen. Or maybe I did. I don't even know anymore. I just know I wore something different. Softer. I curled my hair, even though we were just in the living room. I lit a candle. Just one. Something subtle, but warm. The kind of thing that changes the whole mood of a room without anyone being able to explain why. He sat next to me. We didn't talk much. The movie played, something loud, fast, action-packed, but neither of us were really watching it. I could feel the space between us shrinking. Not physically. Something else. Something inside. It happened slowly at first. His arm brushed against mine. Then I stayed there. My knee tilted slightly, grazing him. And then his hand, careful, unsure, rested on my thigh. I looked at him. He looked back. And that was it. We didn't stop this time. We moved to the bedroom without saying a word. And it wasn't rushed. It wasn't awkward. It was quiet. And in that quiet, we gave in. Completely. Fully. And the second it was over, the silence came back. But this time it felt different. He didn't move away from me. He didn't leave the bed. He lay there beside me, breathing slow, eyes open. And I remember staring up at the ceiling, thinking, what have I done? But the thing is, that question didn't stop me. It didn't even slow me down. That night became a pattern. And the pattern became routine. Joe would leave. Anthony would stay. And the house would shift into something else, something hidden. A version of home where everything looked the same on the outside, but nothing was right on the inside. We got good at pretending. Good at avoiding. Good at timing. There were rules, never in his room, never when anyone could drop by, never in daylight. But the rules didn't make it less wrong. They just made it easier to live with. I told myself it was just physical. That it was filling a void. That it was two lonely people finding comfort in a place where comfort didn't exist anymore. But I knew better. I knew it was more than that. I knew I was falling into something deeper. Something far more dangerous than sex. It wasn't just the guilt. Or the secrecy. It was the way he looked at me like I wasn't invisible. Like I mattered. Like I was his. I started to resent the sound of Joe's voice. Every time he called, I felt pulled away from the one place I actually felt seen. I stopped answering sometimes. Blaming bad service or being asleep. He never asked twice. He never pushed. And that just made it easier. The guilt was still there, but it didn't roar like it did that first night. It became a hum, a constant, quiet thing that lived under my skin but never screamed loud enough to stop me. And over time, it stopped feeling like cheating. It just started to feel normal. I convinced myself I was in love. That Joe didn't care about me. That Anthony and I were something real. But it was a lie I kept dressing up as love. When Anthony left for college, I told myself it would be a reset. A break. Space. That it would help me remember who I was. Who I was supposed to be. And for a while, it almost felt like it worked. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet I used to hate. This time it felt earned. Like I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. I went back to my old routines. Mornings on the patio. Long baths. Pouring half a glass of wine and leaving the rest. I even answered Joe's calls without forcing it. But that didn't last. The first week Anthony was gone, I kept checking my phone out of habit. I'd open our texts, scroll back through them, then lock my screen. Over and over again. Like muscle memory. Like I couldn't stop. By the second week, I caved and messaged him. Something simple, just a hope you're settling in okay. He replied almost immediately. And from there, it didn't stop. We started texting at night. Nothing explicit. Nothing inappropriate, at first. Just conversation. How classes were going. What his roommate was like. What he was eating. If he missed home. And then, if he missed me. I didn't realize how far I'd already fallen until I found myself waiting for that little typing bubble to pop up like it was air. I'd leave my phone face up next to my pillow, hoping he'd say goodnight. And when he didn't, I couldn't sleep. Then one night, it happened. He didn't reply at all. I waited an hour. Then another. Then I checked his social media. I never used to care, but that night I looked. And that's when I saw her. Her name was Brielle Hopkins. Blonde. Pretty. Young, obviously. She'd posted a picture of the two of them, some campus event. His arm around her. Her face tucked against his shoulder like she belonged there. My stomach turned. I stared at that photo for a long time. Studying every inch of her like it would tell me something I didn't already know. I zoomed in on their hands. Her nails. The way he looked so comfortable with her. And that's when it started, the spiral. I didn't text him that night. I didn't sleep. I just paced the kitchen, lights off, trying to pretend I wasn't completely losing it. But I was. I told myself she meant nothing. That it was just college. That she was a distraction. A phase. That he still cared about me, that what we had was different. Stronger. Real. And when he finally texted me the next day, I didn't bring her up. I acted like I hadn't seen anything. But I could feel the shift. He was colder. Shorter. Taking longer to reply. And every message felt like a cliff I was about to fall off. I started showing up. I told Joe I needed to visit a friend in the city where Anthony's school was. That I just needed a change of scenery. Joe didn't question it. He paid for the hotel. Said to enjoy myself. He had no idea what I was really doing. I didn't tell Anthony I was coming. I showed up near campus and texted him when I got there. Told him I missed him. Told him I just wanted to see his face. He made an excuse, said he had a group project, said he didn't have time. I knew he was lying. I could feel it. I stayed anyway. I waited in my car across from his dorm. I watched him leave with her. Holding her hand. Laughing. And I felt something break in me. Later that night, I confronted him. I told him I didn't understand. I told him what we had wasn't just physical. I told him I thought he felt the same. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Told me I needed to stop. That this wasn't what he wanted anymore. But I didn't listen. I kept pushing. Calling. Showing up when I knew I shouldn't. Telling myself he was confused. That she was temporary. That he still needed me. I clung to that lie like it was all I had left. I wasn't thinking straight anymore. I wasn't acting like a woman, or a stepmother, or even a decent person. I was acting like someone who couldn't let go. And I couldn't. That night. I knew better. I knew I should have said no. I knew I shouldn't have let him in again. But knowing never stopped me before. Joe was out of town, somewhere I can't even remember now. I think it was Dubai, or maybe Berlin, it all blurred together by that point. He'd left 3 days earlier. And like always, the silence settled in fast. The kind that eats through the walls, crawls across the floors, and presses against your chest until it feels like you're suffocating in your own house. Anthony was home on break. He texted me that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just said he was around, asked what time dinner would be ready. Like nothing had ever happened. Like we were just normal. I knew what he meant. So I cooked. Something simple. Pasta, I think. I didn't eat much of it. My stomach was too tight. By the time the dishes were done, he was already standing too close. His hand brushed my back as he passed behind me, and I didn't flinch. I let it happen. I let all of it happen. Like I always did. We ended up in my bedroom. Again. No hesitation. No words. Just hands. Mouths. Familiar patterns our bodies had memorized long ago. I don't remember how long it lasted. It wasn't about time. It wasn't about passion either, not really. It was habit. Need. A craving that felt impossible to quit, no matter how sick it made me. We didn't hear the door. I don't know if it was left unlocked, or if it didn't shut all the way. Maybe it wasn't even his fault. Maybe it was mine. I don't know. What I do know is, the door opened. And someone walked in. At first, I didn't see him. I was still under the sheets, catching my breath, staring at the ceiling. Anthony froze beside me, that's what made me sit up. And then I saw the look on his face. That's when I turned. That's when I saw him. Chris Kirk. Anthony's friend from college. He'd come home with him for the break, I didn't even know. I hadn't been told. No one said a word. And there he was, standing in the hallway, mouth slightly open, face pale like he'd just seen a ghost. No words. No yelling. No dramatic outburst. Just silence. And then, just like that, he turned around and left. The door didn't slam. It didn't creak. It just clicked. Soft. Final. Panic hit like a wave. Anthony jumped out of bed, grabbing clothes off the floor, swearing under his breath. I told him not to chase after Chris. I told him to let it go, to wait, to breathe, but he didn't listen. He ran down the hall half-dressed, calling his name, begging him to stop. And me? I just sat there. Still under the covers. Still bare. Still trembling. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. Something I can't even name. I knew it was over. Right then. Right in that second. Not in a slow burn kind of way. Not in a maybe we can't fix this kind of way. It was final. There was no unseeing it. No covering it back up. No spinning some excuse that could make it make sense. Everything we'd hidden for 2 years, every lie, every whispered moment, every line we crossed, it all came pouring out in the quiet swing of a half-open door. I've never felt so exposed. Not just my body, my soul. Every dirty secret I tried to hide came out with the sound of that door swinging open. And there was no going back. Chris didn't say anything at first. Not that night. Not the next day. He stayed in the house, barely, but he didn't speak to me. Wouldn't look at me. Barely looked at Anthony either. He walked through rooms like he didn't want to touch the air around him. I kept thinking maybe he'd just leave. Go back to school. Pretend it never happened. Maybe we got lucky. But that kind of secret doesn't stay quiet for long. And we weren't lucky. A week passed. Then 2. Anthony tried to act like things were fine. Like we could bounce back. He kept checking in with Chris, asking if he was okay. If he needed anything. If they were still friends. Chris kept answering with half nods and one-word replies. And then, all at once, the silence cracked. It started with Caden Howard. Another college kid, someone from their friend group. I don't know what Chris told him exactly, but it was enough. Enough to turn whispers into suspicion. Enough for glances to start lasting a little too long. Enough for my phone to start lighting up with weird numbers and no voicemails. Enough for Anthony's expression to change every time he walked through the door. He stopped sleeping well. He'd stare at the ceiling at night, eyes wide open. Barely touched his food. Didn't kiss me anymore. He was disappearing in pieces. I tried to talk to him, but every conversation felt like two people clinging to a story that didn't work anymore. Then it reached Joe. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. Joe wasn't like that. He was calculated. Quiet. Dangerous in a way I hadn't seen before. One night, he came home early. Said his meetings had been cancelled. Said he was going to be working from the house for a few days. I knew what it meant. He didn't have to say it. He watched us. Studied the way Anthony and I moved in the same room. Studied our silences. Our timing. The way we avoided looking at each other too long. He started asking strange questions. About dinner. About who was where and when. His tone never changed. But his eyes did. Then one morning, he sat down at the kitchen table. Looked me straight in the face and asked me, just like that, if I was sleeping with his son. I laughed. I shook my head. I told him that was disgusting. That I was hurt he'd even ask something like that. And he just kept looking at me. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Didn't say a word. That silence broke me. I don't remember what I said after that. I just remember the feeling. My throat closed up. My hand shook. The lie wouldn't come out. It stuck in my mouth like something rotten. So I told the truth. Not all of it. But enough. I said it had only happened once. That it was a mistake. That it had been confusing. That I didn't know what I was thinking. That I regretted it. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stood up. Walked out of the room. And when I heard the door close behind him, I knew that was it. By the end of that week, Anthony was gone. Joe told him to pack up and leave. Didn't say where to. Didn't say for how long. Just, out. And a few days later, the papers showed up. Divorce. No discussion. No negotiation. Just final. I didn't fight it. How could I? Joe left the house the next morning. Moved into some condo near the airport. Never called. Never came back. He cut me off the same way someone might snip a loose thread, no emotion, just necessity. And Anthony? He vanished. Blocked my number. Changed his social media. Stopped answering emails. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't scream. Didn't beg. Just erased me like I'd never existed. Like none of it had ever happened. And maybe that's what I deserved. I used to think silence was my punishment. But it's not. It's the knowing. The living with what I've done, that's the real sentence. It never ends. It just waits for you every morning. It's been years. I haven't seen Joe since the day he walked out. I don't know where he lives now. Whether he remarried. Whether he ever tells people about me, or if I've been erased from his story the way I erased the truth from mine. And Anthony, there's been nothing. No texts. No calls. Not even a rumor. I don't know what city he's in, what he does for work, whether he's okay, whether he hates me, or worse, whether he doesn't even think about me at all. Sometimes I wonder if he ever loved me. Or if he just got swept up in something he didn't know how to stop. I wonder if I twisted something inside him. If I left a scar that follows him into his own relationships now. If he flinches when someone touches his face the way I used to. If he sees my reflection in people he wishes he didn't. And that thought, that I could have left something like that behind, that's what hurts the most. I don't have answers. I don't have closure. What I have is silence. The kind that doesn't soothe. The kind that echoes back at you when you're lying awake at night, staring at a ceiling that won't blink. So why am I telling this? Why now? Not for pity. God, no. Not for attention. Not because I think I deserve anything good from it. I'm telling this because it happened. Because I held it in my chest for so long it started to rot. And when you bury something that deep, it doesn't stay hidden. It grows. It finds cracks. It poisons things. I kept telling myself I wasn't that kind of woman. That I was better than the thing I'd done. But I wasn't. I'm not. I crossed a line, and then I stayed there. I didn't trip. I walked into it. I built a home in the wrong place and pretended it was love. I didn't tell this story to be forgiven. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't tell it to justify what happened. Nothing can. I'm telling it because I need to say it out loud. Fully. Finally. Every part of it. I need to stop hiding behind what could have been. What might have happened if just one moment went differently. If I had locked that door. If Chris hadn't come. If Anthony had stayed. If I had pulled away before that first kiss. But none of those things happened. What happened is this. I was lonely. I was selfish. I let myself believe a lie because it felt better than the truth. And the truth is, I hurt people. I betrayed the people who trusted me. And I lost everything that mattered. I forgot to lock the door. And someone walked in. But really, that door had been wide open for a long time. And now, I can't close it. I can only confess. If this story meant something to you. If it made you feel something. I hope you'll share it. Comment. Like. Subscribe. Not for me. But for someone out there who might be holding a secret they don't know how to say out loud. Maybe this will help them find the words.